Howdy folks, today we're going to be making low-carb shepherd's pie, and as you know, shepherd's pie has two principal layers to it. It has a kind of meat layer, often made with lamb, and technically I guess it's supposed to be lamb, but you often find ground beef, although some people will quibble with you and say that's really cottage pie rather than shepherd's pie. But however that may be, it has a meat layer and a potato layer. So here's how we're going to make our meat layer. We're going to take some ground beef, and I've got this 96/4 ground beef because it won't have so much fat. And then I've got diced onions and celery, and we're going to be using that. We're also going to be using rosemary, a very common spice in shepherd's pie, though not a mandatory one. We're going to be using ground black pepper, and we're also going to be using some tomato sauce. And this Hunt's tomato sauce is particularly nice to use because it has only 3 grams of digestible carb per serving. So as far as tomato sauces go, it's pretty low. So let's get to cooking. One of the things that I like to do when I'm browning meat is I like putting a little bit of water in the meat because I think it helps it cook more evenly. It kind of provides a medium that helps the heat get distributed evenly, and it also serves as a medium to help us with any other spices or flavors that we're mixing in. It helps get those communicated around within the meat a little better. So I put in a little bit of water, and now I'm going to add my other ingredients, or most of them anyway. I'm going to first sift in some black pepper. I'm going to sprinkle in some rosemary, liberal amount of the onion and celery. You could also use, instead of celery, you could use things like bell pepper as well. That would also be nice. Classically, carrots get used, but carrots are a little high in carbs. They're not too bad. You could use them sparingly if you wanted without ruining the low-carb effect, but I'm not doing that today. And our meat is nicely browned now, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the stove, and then I'm going to drain the beef and put it into a baking dish. Here's the beef mixture in a baking dish, and I'm going to add a couple things to it. One that I didn't mention before is, as a binding agent, I'm going to add just a little bit of egg, maybe the equivalent of 1 egg. And then I'm going to add the tomato sauce. So I'm just going to stir it all up together. And then we're going to set to work on our mashed potato layer. Now, because potatoes are so versatile as a vegetable, there's not a single low-carb equivalent that works for everything. I've showed you a few things like spaghetti squash for hash browns and radishes for home fries. But what are we going to use here? Because normally, shepherd's pie is topped with mashed potatoes. So what are we going to use as a mashed potato equivalent? Well, we're going to use cauliflower, and in fact we're going to use 2 different bags of cauliflower because I want enough to cover the whole top of this. There are a variety of ways that you can cook the cauliflower. You can boil it, for example, but if you get it in the little bags like I did, you can just microwave it in the oven right in those bags. They're designed for that. It says to put it in for 3 or 4 minutes, and since I'm cooking 2 bags, I put it in for 6 minutes. If that's not quite enough to get the cauliflower tender, I'll heat it a little more. But in the meantime, while that's cooking, let me show you the ingredients we're going to use for the potato part of our recipe. We're going to use parsley flakes and paprika and garlic powder, and we're going to use some more black pepper. We will also be using Parmesan and some more egg whites, and we will also use some sour cream. I've taken the cauliflower and put it into a tall saucepan, and we're not actually going to be cooking in the saucepan. I just want to use it as the equivalent of a nice mixing bowl. I needed to cook the cauliflower for a little longer in the microwave to get it tender. I ended up cooking it for about 9 minutes. How long you will need to cook it is going to depend heavily on your microwave because they can be quite different. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a masher, and I'm just going to mash up the cauliflower. And as you can see, it's nice and tender now. It mashes very easily. One of the nice things is you don't have to be too afraid of overcooking it because its purpose is to be mashed. The only thing you really would want to watch out for is you don't want to burn it, but that gives you a nice bit of latitude in terms of how long you want to microwave it. So now that I've got it mashed, I'm going to add other ingredients to it. One that I did not mention earlier, but I think it's a good idea to use it, and it is often found in shepherd's pies, is some butter. And this is about a couple tablespoons of butter, and I think it's particularly good to use it in low-carb shepherd's pie because butter is a taste we often associate with mashed potatoes, and so it helps add a little bit extra familiarity. I'm also going to put in another very common ingredient in shepherd's pie, and that is sour cream. So a couple large tablespoons of that, and then I'm going to add the egg I talked about, and I think I'm going to add the equivalent of about 2 eggs, maybe a little more. Then we're going to put in black pepper, and we're going to put in garlic, and I'm going to be pretty liberal with the garlic on this. There tends to be a good amount of garlic that gets used. Also, parsley flakes. And then I'm going to mix it all up. Once I've got it mixed up, I'm going to simply spoon it over the top of the meat preparation we made earlier. And we'll get all of it down onto the surface, and then we're going to just smooth it out. There we are. It's looking good already. Then we're going to add a last couple of things, but first I'm going to get a fork and I'm going to score the surface with the fork. And this is, you often see this done with shepherd's pie. Sometimes you don't, but there's more to this than just decoration. It's more than just the presentation. Actually scoring it like this will help the top of the pie absorb more heat and change color and texture, and so it actually helps in the cooking process. So you want to go ahead and score. And now it's time for our last 2 ingredients. We're going to add Parmesan cheese, grated Parmesan, and this will help give it a golden brown color on top, as well as some nice extra taste. And lastly, we're going to sprinkle it with some paprika, which is mostly just for presentation. Okay, once we've got that done, it's time to pop it in the oven. And here's the finished product. I baked it in the oven for about 20 minutes at 450. There are different schools of thought about how long to bake it, but that's what I used. And as you can see, it's acquired a nice little bit of extra color here on the surface. Thought that I'd do a quick video afterward. I'm having my first serving of this right now, and I realized I forgot to mention how many carbs are in it. The whole pan has about 28 grams of carb in it, and so if you divide it into 4 portions, each portion would have about 7 grams of carb. Digestible, that is. There's also a good bit of undigestible due to the fiber in the cauliflower, so it's also a nice dish for getting some fiber. If you divide the pan into 5 servings like I'm doing here, it would end up being a little bit less than 6 grams of carb, so 5.5 or 6 grams of carb per serving. One thing I thought I'd mention, I was really pleased by this, the mashed potato equivalent layer turned out very nice and fluffy and kind of spongy, and it has a very nice texture that's very much like ordinary mashed potatoes. So I just thought I'd mention that. It turned out really well. Thanks. Bon appetit.